All right, in this video, we're going to be concentrating on the standard windows. So we'll talk about some of these other families in a later video, but for now, I would like to go over the main features for these windows and just show you how to use them. So let's go over the most common parameter settings, and then we'll get into some of the more specific features as we go. Let's just go down the line. So if you've bought from us before, some of this will be familiar. Some of this, if you're new, then let me just explain. When we add parameters into a family in any of our products, we only use a couple categories. So if you come over here and you look through your parameters dialog box, there's the default categories that Revit forces us to have, and it depends on the type of family we're looking at. Revit will require some parameters. So this constraints up here, these parameters are required by Revit and I can't control them. So those are there. But the categories we use are the graphics category, materials and finishes category, and the dimensions category. Everything else is something Revit includes, or the other category, which is where I place parameters that I need to control or to help the family work, but aren't meant for you to change. So I'm just going to collapse that. So these are our three categories: graphics, materials, and dimensions. So inside the graphics category, you're going to find anything that changes how the window looks or functions. Inside the materials, that's straightforward. This controls all of the Windows material parameters. And then dimensions is anything that changes the dimensions of the windows. It's pretty straightforward. I tried to make them make sense, but anything outside of that is either not meant for you to use or is a Revit, just a default. So let's talk about this. In the case of Windows, this first category is important. It's the one Revit forces us to have, and it tells you which level of your project the window is hosted to, and then it tells you how high the seal height is. So this is really important when you schedule. So I do say pay attention to this. You'll want to make sure it's hosted to the level you think it's going to be hosted to, or you expect it to be hosted to, and that it's the correct seal height. So you can see if I change this to 0, it'll pull it right to the floor. If I change it to 3 feet, it'll put it at 3 feet, and I had it at 2.5 feet, so we'll put it back at that. So that's how you change the seal height. Then moving down, I think I'm just going to go in these in just we're just going to quickly go down this line in order. So there's the first two parameters you get are controlling the style of the trim. So there's an exterior trim option and an interior trim option. Now, if you look over here at our window, we're going to start messing with it. One of the features we've included, if you hover over our windows, you'll see in blue down here, there's an X, and on this side, there's an I. And if you click the window, those will stick. So now as I turn and look at this, I can see which side has an X and which side has the I icon. And it's built so that you can see it in 3D and in elevation or in plan view. So you should be able to see the X or the I no matter what view you're in. And this is to help you know which side is the exterior side and which side is the interior, I being interior and X being exterior. So now when I come over here to pick which trim I want to change, I know what side of the window I'm changing. So let's start with the exterior side, which is this side with the X. Right now, the trim that it's showing is basic. So we could change this from the basic trim to something else. And if you have any questions, like what does the basic trim look like? Or if I do this, it'll give me a drop down of, do you see how it says window trim? And then there's basic, brick trim, colonial, federal, Greek revival 1, 2, and 3. Well, you're not gonna know what those look like. So we included, and if you watched my previous videos, you'll know this, but there is a catalog. And if you open that catalog, there is one page that tells you, here are the nested options. So at the top are the grill options, and then down at the bottom, these are all the trim options. So right now we have the basic trim showing, but maybe we want to do, let's just do federal because it's an extreme example. So on the outside, we're going to change it from basic to federal. And then we're going to come out here and you can see that it changed. Now you might be asking yourself, if we go back to the catalog and we looked at federal, do you see how it has this whole headpiece here, but it's not showing in the family? That goes into some of our other options. So let's talk about that. So we picked our style is federal, but there's these other additional options. So if I go down here, there's something called fancy head trim. And do you see how the exterior side is shut off? If I click that, it'll give me the fancier version of the trim. So not all trims have this, but many of them do. If there's like an option that's typically done in that style where there's a head over the window, you can turn it on and off by using the fancy head trim. So if I want to turn it off, it's just going to take that profile and sweep it around the top of the window. And if you want the fancy head, then you can click to add the fancy head. The same principle applies to the seal. Again, not all windows have all of these, or not all styles have these options, but many of them do. So right here, it says fancy seal trim. And do you see how it's turned off? If we click that, it'll turn it on and it'll add a seal onto it. So typically you use the fancy head and seal for the interior side. Usually we're a little more basic on the exterior of a house. If you're doing like a crazy, like an old style building, then you probably would want some of this stuff on the exterior. But generally we just want the simple version. So I'm going to turn off the fancy head trim and the fancy seal trim, and it'll get us just back to just that profile. It's a federal profile, but it's just swept simply around the outside. Okay, so that's kind of, that's that first option. Now the second parameter controls the interior. So let's change it from colonial to, let's do Greek Revival on the inside. Now if I turn that around, you can see it's now Greek Revival. And again, you can play with this. If you don't want the fancy head, I don't think, so for Greek Revival, I don't think there is a fancy head option. So doing this does nothing. You see how it does nothing? So that's how you know. But the fancy seal, we can turn that off if we'd like. And it'll just put rosettes all around the window. Or if you want that seal back, you can turn on the fancy seal. All right, let's continue to explore down here. You also have the option, the next set of parameters you have are to show the trim on the exterior or interior. So sometimes maybe you don't want trim shown on one or both sides. You can control that here. So if I uncheck the exterior side, the trim just goes away, and now you're only seeing the window frame and the sashes. It's just a raw, just an untrimmed opening. And likewise, if I turn around to the interior, I can shut off the interior. Okay, so I'm going to turn those both back on for now. And now we're going to drill deeper into some of the trim control. Let's look on the, let's get this back to, let's go back to a colonial style interior trim with our fancy head and our fancy seal. And let's go through some of these. So the next set of options is control over whether you're showing the head trim or not showing the head trim. On the inside, this isn't always so important because we usually show all of the trim around the windows. But on the exterior side, sometimes maybe you have a brick band or a stucco band above the window that also doubles as the header to the window. Or more often than not, you have a wainscot band at the bottom of the window and you don't want to have trim there. You would rather you have that wainscot band functioning as your seal. So the next couple options help you shut off different parts of the trim. So the first option you have is to shut off the head trim. The second option is the side trim. And then finally the seal trim. So you can flip these on and off to get any combination of trim that you want. So let's shut off the exterior head trim, and you'll see that that just disappears. So it literally just cuts it off. And that's really, it's just to help if you had other things happening on the facade that you want to help coordinate with the way the windows are trimmed. So likewise, let's shut off, let's say we want the head trim, but maybe the seal trim, we have a wainscot, and so we just want it to shut off. So it'll also do that. Or we can turn on the head and seal. So for example, something that's common is to just have a header and a seal, but no sides. So let's go back to our basic trim. Oh, I put that on the interior side, sorry. On the exterior, we want basic trim. And we do want the seal, and we want the head, but we don't want the side trim. And so what that does is it gives us a little header and a seal. So now we can have a more simple exterior. And then there's more options you can do. So depending on what trim you've got going, you can really change the look of it by messing with these options. And then additionally, down low, you can control the height of the fancy trim on the bottom, the fancy seal trim, and you can control the height of the fancy head trim. So what we're going to do, just so I can show you a quick example, is we're going to turn on the fancy head trim on the exterior and the fancy seal on the exterior. Actually, I don't want the fancy seal. Let's just leave that like that. Okay, so now you get this option. You see how it's bigger on the top than the bottom? Down here, where it says fancy head trim height, we've got it currently at 8 inches, but maybe we want it even bigger. Maybe we want it 10 inches. You can change that height. You can also, down here, change the overshoot. So you can mess with those as well. So there's a bunch of options. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's stick with just these options up here. So we've gone through all of the trim options. Now let's talk about the casing options. So I'm going to click everything back on so we get a complete window trim. And let's look on the inside. So right now, what's happening is there is a casement. There's a casing. The window has this between the trim. Let's draw here. So we've got the trim piece here, and you can see it's got a thickness. From the trim to the window frame itself, there's this piece of wood. That's what we're calling the casing. So if you don't want that, you can shut that off. So we'll click here and it says show casing. We'll shut off the interior casing. And you can see now just the raw wall is there. And let me show you if I come directly in elevation, watch this edge. When I turn the casing back on, depending on how thick the casing is, the trim is going to move inward. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch casing all the way around the window. And the trim is going to move inward to match that casing. So just give me a second. We're going to click this window. I'm going to turn the show casing on the interior side back on. We're going to click OK. And you'll see that it moved in 1/2 inch on all sides so that when you look in 3D, the edge of the trim still lines up with the casing. So depending on whether you have casing on or off, it will move the inside edge of the trim. So just be aware of that. So on the outside, we also have casing on, but we may want to shut that off because if your window's not set back in the wall, it probably doesn't need casing. So we'll not show the exterior casing, and you'll see the window grew. And so now the edge of the trim is on exactly the edge of the frame of the window. They're coplanar. All right, next would be, we went through turning on and off the fancy head and seal options. So the next thing would be the motion symbol options. So these are just the 3 different kind of symbols. There's your elevation, so whether the motion symbol of the window shows up in elevation, whether it shows up in a section, and whether it shows up in a plan view. So let's just switch to those views so that you can see that. Okay, so in elevation on this window, this is an awning window. But this applies to any window that has a motion to it, so a casement. Let's click on the casement window. So over here, if I tell it to shut off the motion symbol in elevation, I can click that, and it will stop showing that. And it does the same thing in section and in plan view as well. So if you're not wanting to see those motion symbols, you can shut that. You have individual control in each of your views. And then some, depending on what the motion of the window is, they may have a swing angle. So an awning window would have a swing, same with a casement. Let's look at that in floor plan. Okay, let's zoom in. So here's our casement window, for example. And right now it's showing a 45 swing, but if we wanted to show 90, we could change it to show a 90-degree swing. And then if I didn't want it to show it all, I can unclick it, and it just doesn't show the swing in plan view. So we'll click that back on, and we'll put it back at, let's put it at 30. Now the awning window does the same thing. Right now it's set to, it's opening 10 degrees, it's swinging out 10 degrees, but if you wanted to do the full 90 degrees, it will show how far out that window would go if you completely opened it up 90 degrees, right? But typically you don't open an awning window up 90 degrees, so I think the default we have it come in at is 10. And then the hopper is the same thing, but opposite. And then if you did want to just see what it's doing in section, we can take a look there. And this is showing, let's do only the one window. And so this is showing your awning window. If I change that back to 90 degrees, you can see what it's doing. So that's section. And again, if I uncheck that, you won't see it, that motion symbol in section if you don't want. All right, let's click on the skin and continue. Then let's go back to our elevation. There are controls for the mullions. So depending on what style of mullion you've picked, you'll get different options here. So we currently have a window with colonial grills, and that you change the grill style. I should have probably made this clear in the beginning. When we click on this window, all these parameters we've been going through, these are the instance parameters. So this will just change this one instance of the window. If you want to change major style portions of the window, you'll have to go to the type parameters, and we can cover those in a minute. But you can see right now the grill style is set to colonial, and so depending on what kind of grills you have set for this window, these parameters may or may not do stuff. So if you didn't have horizontal grills and you only had vertical grills, obviously the horizontal override is not going to do anything. But let me just show you. Because we have colonial grills, we have both horizontal and vertical. So right now, if you leave those at 0, Revit automatically calculates the spacing of the grills based on the size of the window. So it'll do it for you. But if you want to take control and say we want fewer lights in this window, maybe we only want 1 vertical grill and 2 horizontal, we can override that here. So as long as it stays 0, it's going to automatically calculate. But if you want to override, we can. So we're going to do 2 horizontal and 1 vertical. And when you put that in, you can see how it rearranged the grills. So that's kind of the last option you have there. Each window, some windows have subtle differences depending on, they may or may not have some of the items we've gone through because of the nature of what type of window it is. But generally speaking, those are most of the graphic parameters you're going to see. Now let's move down. Materials does exactly what you think it's going to do. So let's just paint the exterior a different color here. Let's just make it black. So I'm just going to copy this. So when you look, you can change the actual frame, like the window frame and sash color, and that's independent from the trim material. So if we want the trim to also be black, we can do that. So now everything's black, and you can change the interior differently from the exterior. So now if we look in 3D, the interior is still white, but the exterior is black. So when you click on this, you'll see exterior is independent from interior. And then of course you have the glazing material. Okay, last thing is dimensions. Some dimensions are type parameters and some are instance. So basically what we try to do is to give you the best access, we try to make things a lot of instance parameters unless truly we think it should be type. So if you're truly changing the style and type of the window, it's going to be in the type parameters. But everything else that could change from instance to instance, but without actually changing the type of window, that would all be instance parameters. So for example, let's look at level 1. We're just going to start looking at the inset. So for the inset, I'm going to set this back to 10 degrees open because that looks crazy right now. So this first option is the frame inset. So how, depending on, if you're putting the same window in different wall types, you don't need to change all of the window. You don't need to have a different window type for each wall type. It makes more sense that you could just control the inset of the window on a 1-by-1 basis. So that's why frame inset is a instance parameter. So if you just want to inset the window 1 inch, you can click 1 inch and you can see it now moved that frame 1 inch. And you can see what's going on here. Here's the trim. Here's the casing on the interior side, and then the trim. And then on the exterior, you can see the trim, and you can see there's no casing right here. So this would be, if we're going to inset it, this might be an opportunity to put the casing back on. So let's go back up here and turn on the exterior side casing, and you'll see it added casing to the window. Okay, so in addition to the inset, there is frame extensions. So this is something I use often when I'm doing basements. Let's do a wall type. We're going to do wall 1, and we're going to pretend that's a big concrete wall for your basement foundation wall. And then what happens often is we do a furring wall just to the inside of that. So I'm just going to draw my furring wall. And I haven't bothered to set up the walls correctly. So we're going to pretend this is a furring wall, even though it has more layers than it should. So here's your concrete wall. Here's your furring wall. Now, when I put this window in here, you have to pick which wall you're hosting it to. So often I do the concrete wall. So I'm going to click it. And most Revit families, what happens is, okay, so you see that it didn't cut a hole out yet. So you have to do the join geometry command. So join geometry. I'm going to click that wall and that wall. And once you join the walls, you see how it cuts the hole? It's now cut the hole through both walls, which is great. But it does this weird thing where, so here, let me move this wall a little bit. I'm going to move it out a couple inches. Do you see how the trim and everything is still hosted to the host wall? Revit, when you join walls, it doesn't realize that it needs to consider this whole, both of the walls as one assembly. And so 90% of windows made for Revit give you this behavior where the trim is going to be in, like the interior trim is going to be inside the wall. So when you look at it in 3D, let me hide this real quick. Do you see how it looks wrong? You can't see the trim. And let's actually let's put it 3 feet sill height. So this is what it would normally look like. But we have a feature in both of our windows and our doors to help with this. So if you come here and you click on the window, what we need to know is this distance. So we're going to do the tape measure tool. We're just going to measure from this face where the trim currently is to where we want it to be. That's 10 inches. So we're just going to we're going to go in here on this window, and there's a frame extension, and there's an interior side and an exterior. So we want the frame to extend 10 inches to the exterior side. So I'm just going to put 10 inches here and click OK. And now it moves that whole, it creates those, it treats those 2 walls as if they're one wall. And now when I look in 3D, it looks trimmed properly on both sides, and you just get this extra deep casing. Now, again, if you shut the casing off on the interior side, you're going to see the 2 walls and you're going to see the gap between the walls. But as long as you turn that casing back on, it just looks exactly like how they build it in real life. Okay, so that is what the framing or the frame extension parameters do. You can see there's an interior and exterior. All right, so then there's the fancy head trim height on both sides, and then Oftentimes down lower, there's a fancy seal height as well. So let's just look at what those do. If we take this as our example, we can quickly change the head height, and we're looking on the interior side. So let's change this to 1 foot, and you'll see that goes to 1 foot tall. And then if we change the seal height, fancy seal height, interior, let's make that 6 inches. You can see that gets bigger. Or if we want them to be the same, we can do that. We can do 8 inches on top, 8 inches on bottom on the seal. And now they're the same. All right, let's see what else we've got here. You can change more options about the trim as well. So how wide it is and how thick it is. So let's just change these all at once. The width on the interior side, let's just make it crazy. Let's do it 6 inches. Oops. And let's do the depth. Like say this was on the exterior side and you needed it to catch brick and you needed it to be maybe that's 4 inches deep. So now you can see this just got a lot beefier. It got 4 inches deep and much wider around the whole thing. And then our last options are the overshoot. So the overshoot is talking about here where the bottom and sometimes the top, they overshoot the side of the trim. This helps control that. So instead of 3/4 of an inch, maybe we want a 3-inch overshoot. And you can see it moved those items to overshoot it. And then the last is to control this room detection symbol. So most of the time you won't need to offset this, but maybe this is a high window and this level is open to the level below and you'd like this window to be associated with the room that's down below it. You can offset those room detection symbols down to capture that room. So if I put like 5 feet, I can put that in there and you can see when I hover over this, it's moved those arrows down 5 feet so that it's now detected. It's pushed down into the room below. But like I said, 90% of the time you won't need to do that, but it is useful sometimes to know that that is an option so that things schedule the way you expect. That helps more with scheduling than anything. All right. So that is all of the standard Windows parameters. There, again, depending on the window type, there might be more or less like if you come into the multi-folding here, or I guess this is multi-sliding, you can see you can override the number of sashes. So right now, if we wanted to do 5, we could do 5. And on a double window, it's 5 per side. So that actually makes 10 sashes. Or if you just put it back at 0, it'll automatically calculate the amount of sashes you need based on what you put down here as, or actually it's in the type command, the max sash width. It'll automatically calculate how many sashes you need based on what you said the maximum width of a sash could be. Okay, so again, those are our instance parameters. Let's maybe jump into the type parameters real quick. If I click on a window and hit type, by default, when you load these in, there's only going to be one type, and it's up to you to create the rest of the sizes that you'll need. And so you'll just duplicate this, and then you can change any of these parameters you want. So if we don't want colonial grills, maybe we want prairie grills, we'll click apply, and you can see there's now prairie grills there. In here is where you can turn it into a picture window. If you don't want the grills showing at all, you can uncheck that option and hit apply. And the grills go away. And we already talked about the Australian motion symbol in a previous video, but if you're from Austria and in elevation, your door swing symbol is opposite as it is in the USA, you can click that and it will flip it for you. This number is what controls the, let me show you that. If we look in plan view and we hover over this, you can see that little guide on the side. That guide is meant for aligning the window. So if I had an interior wall here, I guess actually in this example, the interior is on the side. So maybe I was in a shower or a bathroom and it wasn't very wide. These little symbols help me know how to consistently align it. So if you wanted to align that to that wall, you could. And this is a little bit messed up because I made these trim pieces so wide. Let's go back to 3-inch trim on the inside and only 1/2 inch deep, more normal. It will help you more consistently align. Anyways, you can decide how wide your trim is, and then you can set this, this marker is controlled inside the window right here. So if we wanted all of our windows to at minimum be always 6 inches from any adjacent walls, you can set that to 6 inches and it will move that alignment line. So now I know that if I use that alignment line, that is 6 inches. The window opening is 6 inches from any adjacent walls. And I know that my trim is going to fit in that 6 inches. Okay. In addition to that, there is all of the just the dimension parameters that you would expect: the width, the height, and then the let's talk about what these more specific ones are. So the rail. Let me zoom in here. Let's pick one of these windows down here. I'm going to zoom in real close, and we'll open the type parameters again. So width and height are pretty self-explanatory, but rail width, this is the rail. This is what we're, so it's part of the sash. So basically the sash frame is what we're calling rail. So you can control the width and the depth of this portion of the window in the sash. And then you can control the actual frame of the window, which in this case is this. You can control its width and its depth as well. And then there's the casing thickness. So that'll determine this distance from here to here. You can change how wide and deep the grills are on the windows. So to look at that, we need to look in 3D. So the grill here, you can determine how far out it's sticking from the glass surface and how wide it is in here. And then you can also pick how thick you want the glass to be. And then your rough opening clearance. Again, this only shows up, usually people are only concerned about this number if they are trying to schedule the rough opening of the windows. It's important that you're able to change the clearance. So in addition to the opening size of the window, how much more clearance do you want around the window for the rough opening size? And then below that, it will do the math for you based on the width and height. It'll add that rough opening clearance and give you a rough width and a rough height that you can then schedule. All right, hopefully that helps with all of the standard windows. Keep watching these videos to dive deeper into some of the other windows.